Should a good film leave unanswered questions?
Oh, I think so. I don't think a film has to answer every single question. In our previous interview, I believe we talked about this, in fact, that I think that every film is a kind of a question mark if you do it right, and I still believe that. I think that most good films leave you something to think about. I'm not saying that means you need to be sloppy or lazy or not have a good plot or direct and do your job properly. But you need to, I think, to make a great film, to leave something that has the audience left to wonder, to ask a question about. When we did Angel of Anywhere, specifically where I was working with the writers on the script, when we came up with the concept, that I wanted it to have an intentional vagueness to its ending that left the audience with a question instead of a period. I think in my own personal taste, that is what makes a better film, because then I don't walk out and say, oh, everything was resolved, that was lovely. It gives me something to think about long after I've watched it, and the films that I've most enjoyed do that. And so I try to emulate that in my own work.
Any recent films that have left with you with a question mark? Any recent
films that left me with a question mark? A Star is Born was an interesting film, I thought, that left some very interesting questions. Now, I did not love the film. Oh. I liked half of the film. I thought it was half of a good film. I thought the other half of it was... I thought the second half of A Star is Born, the script wasn't very well constructed. But I thought that it did leave some interesting character stuff with you. In fact, I think the character stuff in that film is far more interesting than the plot itself, because Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga and Sam Elliott, for that matter, all give terrific career-defining performances, in my opinion, which is a weird thing to say, that I didn't love the film, but I loved the characters inside of it, because the way that they constructed character, and remarkably for a first-time director, Bradley Cooper is amazing. Amazing! I can't wait to see what he does again, truly. Those characters left me with questions because they're all ambiguous. There's nothing about those characters that are defined in this kind of specific way. It is always asking you a question about who they are, what their motivations are, what their purposes are. The three principles, not some of the secondary ones. But Lady Gaga, Bradley Cooper, and Sam Elliott always leave you with something to ask a question about where they come from, what their motivation is. There's a certain dynamic about what it means to be an artist, and that I think that's very honest. And those characters leave you that question. And so sometimes it doesn't even have to be plot, because I think the plot itself isn't very good, but the characters are fantastic.
Andrew Dice Clay, too. It was great when she came back.
Fabulous.
And that was kind of her little, I guess working class world that she lived in, and sort of the safety of her dad and all these guys,
Exactly.
Hanging around
and it's this world that, they create. And look, I don't like to badmouth people's films. I'm really not trying to, because I know how hard it is to make a film. But I think that even if it's a film that I didn't like in its totality, like A Star is Born, I understand how well directed that film was watching it. I also understand how well acted it was. And so I think that with many films, even the ones that you don't necessarily like in their entirety, that doesn't make it a good or bad film. I think that's the Rotten Tomatoes-ization of how we look at films, right? It's 70% good or 30% bad. That's false. That's a falsehood. And that's not even how that thing works. It's an aggregate percentage of positive or negative reviews. It means nothing about it's 70% good or bad. I think there are things that we pull from all films, even ones that we like in some ways and not in others. So it's a good example of that, I think.
Did you see 8th Grade?
I loved 8th Grade.
I loved it too. Do you know someone got out of the theater, left, they were just, I won't say which scene it was. Yeah. It wasn't the totally PC scene, and they had just had it, and they made this big production.
I thought it was a wonderful film. 8th Grade was also now 8th Grade I think had one of the best screenplays of the year. That was such a sharply written script, and Elsie Fisher is a revelation. I mean, it really was a wonderful, wonderful film.
Yeah.